It's time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in today's Washington Post, there is a major story on the front page of the style section about a young woman named Sarah Poole. One of the headlines says, Sarah Poole, 31, has a baby and a job and loves them both, but she fears she'll be paying off student loans till the day she dies. She got loans totaling $60,000, but now owes $69,000. And she's quoted as saying, I keep paying, but it's like pouring into a bucket with no bottom. Mr. Speaker, for several years I've been speaking out about how harmful the federal student loan program has become for many hundreds of thousands of students and families around this country. In May of 2015, I wrote an article for the Washington Examiner newspaper with ideas about how to bring down the cost of college. In that article, I quoted hedge fund manager James Altucher, who wrote that, quote, we're graduating a generation of endangered students. And Ohio University economist Richard Vedder, who wrote a book several years ago entitled Going Broke by Degree. In the February issue of Chronicles magazine, which will be out in just a few days, I have another article. And in that article, I say that student loan debt in the United States is now $1.48 trillion. That incredible sum is a heavy drag on the economy and a burden on young people, and federal intervention in education is the cause. It wasn't always this way. In June of 1965, I began working as a salesman at the Sears store in Knoxville, receiving a 10 cents an hour raise over my job as a bag boy at the A&P. At Sears, my wage was $1.25 an hour. I was required to wear a suit and tie, and I was very proud of that job. I worked full-time that summer, and usually around 20 hours a week after I began my freshman year at the University of Tennessee in late September. After I'd worked at Sears for 6 months, I didn't realize I'd been there 6 months, I was called to the office for the first time. I was very concerned, to put it lightly. I met David Weaver, who was my same age, 18, at the escalator. I told him I bet I'd been hit by one of those Hallmark shoppers, one of the mystery shoppers Sears had at the time. He told me he had just been called by a very angry woman to whom he had sold the wrong color of paint. David said he was scared and that he had diabetes, and when he got too nervous, he passed out. I can remember that conversation as if it happened yesterday. Much to our relief, we had been called to the office so management could give us good news. Because we had been working at Sears for 6 months, they were giving us a nickel an hour raise. It shocks students at the University of Tennessee today when I tell them that tuition my freshman year was $90 per quarter, $270 for the academic year. By my senior year, it was $405. I remember hearing our minority leader, Mr. Hoyer, say that when he started at the University of Maryland, it was $87 a semester. Almost no one left college in those days with debt unless they had bought a car or made some other major purchase. Students certainly did not go into debt for tuition because they could all work part-time, as I did, and pay all their school expenses. Now over 44 million Americans carry student loan debt, some of those debts reaching into the six figures. Reader's Digest recently published an article in the December-January issue entitled The Student Debt Racket. The authors quote one student who owes $90,000 as saying, quote, my loans are a black cloud hanging over me. I'm a student debt slave. College and universities began heavily promoting student loans in the late 60s and early 70s. They were able to tamp down opposition to tuition and fee increases by telling students, don't worry, we'll just get you a loan. Then, because loans were available, many schools began raising tuition at 2 and 3 times the rate of inflation each year and have continued to do so. I remember reading an article about 3 years ago in the Post which said that student tuition had gone up 4.5 times the rate of inflation since 1985. Now the cost of higher education has soared to such great heights that universities are bragging if they hold the annual increases to 2 or 3%. They never consider reductions, not even minuscule ones. Thus, we have another example of how big government liberalism helps the few at the top while harming the many down below. The federal student loan program has made the owners of some loan servicing companies very wealthy and has been a boon to most college administrators and tenured professors. and all of this at great expense to students and their families. When the Knoxville News Sentinel lists the highest paid people in East Tennessee each year, they're almost all at TVA or UT. Yet the pattern continues to repeat. Liberals find a very small group of people who are having trouble paying for something, then insist that the only solution is to let the federal government, quote, help. But whenever the federal government subsidizes something, the costs simply explode because most of the incentives or pressures to hold costs down vanish. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I would say this is why Mark Cuban, the Shark Tank star, has said, if you want to make college really expensive, make it free. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.